The radio crackle cut through the desert heat like a blade through silk. "Command, this is Viper Lead. We have troops in contact. Grid November Victor 7349, requesting immediate close air support." The voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it ran a current of something close to desperation. At Bagram Airfield, the operations center erupted into controlled chaos. Screens flickered with thermal images of a mountain valley where American forces were pinned down by Taliban fighters in elevated positions. The situation was deteriorating fast. Every available aircraft was already tasked, every pilot accounted for, except one. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hendricks stood at the situation map, his jaw set like granite. 23 years of service had taught him to read between the lines of radio traffic, and what he heard now made his blood run cold. The ground team was surrounded, taking fire from three sides with enemy reinforcements moving through the valley. They needed help in minutes, not hours. "Sir, we have one asset available," a young controller said, his voice uncertain. "Hawkeye 77. Thunderbolt. Single ship returning from a reconnaissance run over the Panjshir." Hendricks frowned. "Who's flying it?" The controller checked his screen and something flickered across his face. Hesitation, maybe doubt. "Captain Nix Keller, sir, call sign Reaper." The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. Hendricks felt his chest tight. He knew that name. Everyone did. 3 deployments, 274 combat hours. A silver star she never talked about in a medical discharge that should have ended her career. But 6 months ago she'd come back through a bureaucratic miracle or curse depending on who you asked, flying solo missions, keeping to herself, avoiding eye contact in the ready room. The other pilots called her the Ghost. Not because she was quiet, but because she moved through the squadron like someone who'd already left. Hendricks had seen the after-action reports. Her flying was textbook perfect, mechanical, cold. She completed every mission exactly as briefed, never deviating, never taking initiative. It was the flying of someone going through motions, fulfilling obligations, counting days. Not someone you'd trust with lives hanging in the balance. "Sir," the controller's voice pulled him back. "Viper Lead is requesting immediate support. They're taking casualties." Through the window, Hendricks could see the flight line shimmering in the heat. Somewhere out there, beyond the perimeter, an A-10 was inbound. Inside it, a pilot who'd once been considered among the best in the Air Force. Before the incident no one was supposed to talk about. Before whatever happened in that valley 2 years ago that turned Nix Keller into a ghost. He reached for the radio handset, his hand steadier than his thoughts. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Lives depended on the decision he was about to make. American soldiers pinned down in a kill zone, bleeding into the Afghan dust, waiting for the sound of salvation. And the only salvation available was a pilot who'd stopped believing in anything except getting through one more day. Hendricks pressed the transmit button. "Hawkeye 77, this is Bagram Command. We have troops in contact requiring immediate close air support. Stand by for tasking." The radio hissed with static. Then, after a pause that seemed to stretch toward infinity, a voice came back. Flat, emotionless, professional. "Command Hawkeye 77, send it." 2 words. No hesitation. No acknowledgement of what was being asked. Just the clinical acceptance of a mission, as if this were a training exercise and not a desperate gamble with human lives. Hendricks closed his eyes for just a moment. In the background, he could hear the controller feeding coordinates and threat assessments to Hawkeye 77. Enemy positions in the rocks above the valley floor. Friendlies marked by infrared strobes. Danger close parameters that would make any pilot's hands sweat. This was the kind of mission that ended careers or made legends. There was no middle ground. Through the operations center windows, the Hindu Kush mountains rose like broken teeth against an impossibly blue sky. Somewhere in that vast expanse, an A-10 Thunderbolt was banking toward a valley where Americans were fighting for their lives. At the controls, a pilot who'd once been extraordinary was about to face the kind of moment that would define everything that came after. But Hendricks didn't know the most important part. He didn't know that 2 years ago, in a different valley, Nix Keller had made a choice that saved 17 lives and cost her everything she believed about herself. He didn't know that she'd spent 732 days learning to live with that choice. And he definitely didn't know that in approximately 14 minutes, she was going to make another one. The A-10 Thunderbolt cut through Afghan airspace like a promise of violence barely restrained. To anyone who understood military aviation, the aircraft was an anomaly, a jet built around a gun so powerful that firing it could stall the engines. Ugly, slow, and absolutely devastating. The Air Force had tried to retire it for decades. The infantry refused to let them. Inside the cockpit, Captain Nix Keller flew with the mechanical precision of someone performing a familiar ritual. Hands moving across controls with muscle memory so deep it bypassed conscious thought. Her eyes scanned the horizon, the instrument panel, the terrain below, in a pattern drilled into her over thousands of hours. But there was no passion in it, no fire, just process. The mission brief crackled through her headset. Enemy forces in elevated positions. Friendlies pinned in a valley. Danger close engagement authorized. Standard stuff, except nothing about combat was ever truly standard. The mountains below were a maze of ridges and shadows, perfect terrain for ambush, where you could hide an army in the folds of ancient rock. She'd flown over landscapes like this so many times they'd stopped being places and become simply terrain. Tactical considerations. Threat assessments. Nothing more. Hawkeye 7-7, this is Viper lead. The new voice on the radio was different from the controller's clinical tone. This one carried the weight of dirt and blood and desperation. We are taking effective fire from ridge positions north and east. We have 2 urgent casualties. How long until you're on station? Nix checked her navigation display. 8 minutes. She keyed the radio. Viper lead, Hawkeye 7-7, 8 mics. I'll need talk on for target identification. There was a pause, then, copy. Be advised, enemy is approximately 75 meters from our position. We need you danger close. 75 meters. In close air support terms, that was kissing distance. The kind of proximity where the difference between precision and catastrophe was measured in feet, not yards. One mistake and she'd be killing the people she was supposed to save. Nix felt nothing at the information. Not fear, not excitement, just acknowledgement. This was the job. The valley appeared ahead, a slash of shadow between mountains. Even from altitude, she could see the tactical situation developing. Smoke rising from multiple points. The distinctive pattern of a unit under coordinated attack. Someone down there was scared. Someone was probably dying. These were facts, not feelings. She'd learned to separate the two. It was the only way to function. Viper lead, Hawkeye 7-7 has visual on valley, marking my position. She toggled the IFF transponder, broadcasting her location to anyone with the right equipment. On the ground, soldiers would be looking up, searching the sky for the distinctive silhouette that meant help had arrived. The A-10's profile was unmistakable. Twin engines mounted high on the fuselage. Straight wings designed for loitering, not speed. The whole aircraft built around the GAU-8 Avenger, a 7-barrel rotting cannon that fired depleted uranium rounds capable of shredding tanks. But Nix knew what the soldiers didn't. She knew that the pilot inside this particular A-10 was a different person than the one who'd flown this aircraft 2 years ago. That version of Nix Keller had believed in something beyond the mission, had felt the weight of responsibility as more than just obligation, had cared about outcomes beyond mission completion. This version just flew the plane and followed the rules and waited for the day when she could stop pretending any of it mattered. Hawkeye 7-7, we're popping smoke now. Red smoke marks friendly position. Below, crimson smoke billowed from the valley floor, a desperate signal in a language written in colors and coordinates. Nix banked the A-10 into an orbit above the valley, her eyes cataloging everything with practiced efficiency. Enemy muzzle flashes in the rocks. Friendly positions clustered behind inadequate cover. The geometry of death playing out in real time. She'd done this before, many times. The procedure was straightforward. Identify targets, confirm friendlies are clear, make the attack run, destroy the enemy, extract, write the report, go back to base. Repeat until you couldn't anymore. But as she completed her orbit and began setting up for the first gun run, something unexpected happened. A voice crackled over the emergency frequency, different from the others, younger, shaking with adrenaline and fear. Any aircraft, this is Viper 2-3. We have a man down in the open. He's 15 meters from our position. We can't reach him. They're zeroing in on his location. For the first time in 732 days, Nix Keller felt something crack in the careful walls she'd built around herself. Because she knew what came next. Someone was going to ask her to do something impossible. And somewhere deep in the part of her that still remembered who she used to be, a voice whispered that maybe impossible was exactly what she'd been waiting for. The A-10 thundered through its orbit, and in the cockpit, a ghost began to remember what it felt like to be alive. Nix's hands moved across the controls with the smooth efficiency of long practice, but her mind was suddenly somewhere else, somewhere unwanted, a different valley, a different desperate call. The memory arrived uninvited, sharp-edged and unforgiving. She'd been flying lead in a two-ship formation that day, responding to a troops-in-contact call in Helmand Province. The situation had been deteriorating fast, enemy fire intensifying, and her wingman, Lieutenant Chris Valdez, 26 years old, engaged to a teacher in Colorado Springs, had taken ground fire on his first gun run. Not catastrophic damage, but enough. Enough to make his aircraft unstable. Enough to make the smart choice obvious. Lead, my hydraulics are failing. I need to egress. His voice had been steady, professional. The voice of a pilot doing exactly what he'd been trained to do. And Nick's flight lead, responsible for the mission, and her wingman had made the call that haunted her still. Negative, Viper 2, one more pass. The ground team won't survive without it. She'd believed it absolutely. The tactical situation had demanded it. One more gun run to break the enemy assault, then they'd both egress together, textbook decision-making under pressure. Valdez had acknowledged and made his run. Perfect execution, even with his aircraft damaged. He'd saved the ground team. And then, climbing out of the valley, his remaining hydraulics had failed completely. She could still see it. His A-10 rolling inverted, nose dropping toward the mountains. Could still hear his voice, calm even then, as he fought controls that no longer responded. Lead, I'm punching out. The ejection sequence had worked perfectly. The parachute had deployed exactly as designed, and Taliban fighters, watching from the ridgeline, had opened fire on a defenseless pilot floating toward Earth. Valdez had died before reaching the ground. The rescue team had recovered his body 3 hours later. The investigation had cleared her completely. Her decision had been tactically sound. The ground team had survived because of that final gun run. 17 soldiers had gone home to their families because she'd kept her wingman in the fight for one more pass. The math was simple. 17 lives saved. 1 life lost. From a utilitarian standpoint, she'd made the right call. But Chris Valdez had died following her order, and no amount of tactical justification could change the weight of that fact. The Silver Star citation praised her exceptional leadership under fire. She'd accepted it in a ceremony she barely remembered, the medal heavy in her hand, heavier still around her neck. 3 months later, she'd requested medical discharge for anxiety and depression. The Air Force, embarrassed by a decorated pilot who couldn't sleep, who couldn't eat, who showed up to fly with dark circles under her eyes, had quietly approved it. She'd spent 8 months in civilian life, working as a flight instructor at a small airport in New Mexico, teaching wealthy hobbyists how to perform lazy eights in Cessnas. Every day, a slow death. Every night filled with dreams of falling parachutes and voices calling her call sign that she could never answer fast enough. Then the bureaucracy had shifted. Pilot shortages, changing policies. Someone in personnel had noticed her file and made a call. Would she consider returning to active duty? She'd said yes without thinking, driven by something she couldn't name. Not redemption, she didn't believe in that anymore. Not duty, that word had lost all meaning. Maybe just the need to be in the air again, even if the air was empty now. They'd assigned her to solo reconnaissance missions. Low-stakes flying. The kind of job they gave pilots they didn't trust with anything important. She'd accepted it without comment, grateful to be flying, not caring that everyone in the squadron knew she was broken. Hawkeye 7-7, did you copy? We have a man down in the open. The voice on the radio pulled her back to the present valley, the present crisis. Nyx blinked, her vision clearing. Below she could see him now. A figure lying motionless on bare ground, exposed 15 meters from the nearest cover. And surrounding that position, enemy muzzle flashes intensifying. They knew what they had. A wounded soldier, helpless, drawing his teammates into the open to attempt rescue. It was a classic kill zone. Ruthlessly efficient, Viper lead Hawkeye 7-7 described the casualty's condition. She kept her voice level clinical. Emotions were liabilities, always had been, now more than ever. He's not moving, we think he's unconscious. Took a round to the leg, maybe more, we can see blood, blood. The word conjured images she'd rather not see. Nyx forced her breathing to remain steady, her hands stable on the controls. This was just another mission, another set of coordinates. Another tactical problem requiring solution. She could compartmentalize. She'd become exceptional at it. Copy. Stand by. She pulled the A-10 into a tighter orbit, studying the terrain with new intensity. The enemy positions were scattered across the ridgeline, dug into rocks that would provide excellent cover from air attack. Taking them out would require multiple gun runs, systematic destruction of each position. Standard procedure. Except standard procedure would take time, and the soldier on the ground didn't have time. Already she could see enemy fighters adjusting their positions, moving to get better angles on the exposed American. They were coordinating, professional, not the untrained militia fighters that sometimes populated these valleys. This was deliberate, calculated combat. Nyx ran the calculations instinctively. Altitude, airspeed, angle of attack. The geometry of violence reduced to mathematics. She could make a gun run on the nearest enemy position, suppress them long enough for the ground team to attempt recovery. 50-50 chance of success, maybe less. Or she could do something else, something dangerous and stupid and completely against protocol. Something that 2 years ago a different version of herself wouldn't have hesitated to attempt. In the cockpit of the A-10, surrounded by instruments and ammunition and the familiar smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid, Captain Nyx Keller felt the careful numbness she'd cultivated begin to crack. Just a little, just enough. She keyed the radio. Viper lead, I have an idea, it's not in the book. There was a pause. Then, we're open to suggestions, Hawkeye. Our guy's bleeding out. Nyx took a breath. The sky above the valley was impossibly blue, the kind of blue that made you believe in things you'd stopped believing in. She'd forgotten what that felt like. The A-10 Thunderbolt dropped toward the valley floor with controlled aggression, Nyx's hand steady on the throttle despite the absolute insanity of what she was about to attempt. In the back of her mind, a voice that sounded like her flight instructor from years ago was screaming that this violated every principle of close air support doctrine. You stayed high. You maintained standoff distance. You never, ever put yourself in a position where the enemy could engage you with small arms fire. But doctrine didn't account for the soldier bleeding into the Afghan dirt while his teammates watched helplessly from cover. Doctrine didn't measure the specific weight of inaction, the particular burden of choosing safety over salvation. All Viper elements, this is Hawkeye 7-7. I'm going low and slow over the casualty position. When I make my pass, suppress any enemy that breaks cover. Acknowledge. Viper lead copies. Are you sure about this? No, she wasn't sure about anything anymore. But uncertainty had stopped being a reason not to act somewhere between her discharge and her return, in those empty months when doing nothing had nearly killed her more efficiently than enemy fire ever could. Hawkeye 7-7 is committed. 3 words that meant she was past the point of reconsideration. The A-10 descended through 3,000 feet, 2,000, the valley walls rising on either side like the edges of a grave. At this altitude, she could see individual rocks, the texture of the terrain, the exact positions of enemy fighters who were probably radioing each other in confusion about the aircraft flying into their engagement envelope. 1,500 feet, 1,000. The A-10 was never meant to fly this low in contested airspace, But the aircraft didn't care about intentions. It responded to her inputs with the faithful reliability of a machine that had been built for punishment. The twin General Electric TF-34 turbofan engines howled their distinctive note. Not the scream of a fighter jet, but something deeper, more ominous. The sound of something heavy and deliberate arriving to deliver consequences. At 500 feet, small arms fire began sparking off the valley walls, green tracers rising to meet her like angry fireflies. They were shooting, but not effectively. Not yet. She was moving too fast, the angle too difficult. That would change. She found the casualty visually. A crumpled figure in desert camouflage, dark stains spreading beneath him, motionless, maybe dead already. She'd know in about 30 seconds. Viper elements mark all enemy positions with tracers. Now, the radio came alive with acknowledgments. On the ground, American rifles began firing not at targets but toward positions, red tracers drawing lines in the air that showed Nix exactly where the enemy waited. It was dangerous for the ground team, revealing their positions, but they did it without hesitation. Trust. They were trusting her with their lives, with their brother's life, and the weight of that trust was something she'd forgotten how to carry. The A-10 roared over the casualty at 300 feet, Nix's eyes cataloging everything in the seconds of her pass. 6 enemy positions. 7. They'd concealed themselves expertly, but movement betrayed them. Muzzle flashes, heads turning to track her aircraft. She wasn't making a gun run, not yet. This was reconnaissance, learning the battlefield, understanding where death waited and how to navigate around it. Though pulled up sharply, Nix grunting against the G-forces as she climbed back to operational altitude. Her hands were shaking now. Not from fear, she'd moved past fear into some territory beyond it, but from adrenaline, from the shock of caring again. Viper lead, I've got eyes on 7 enemy positions. I can suppress them, but I'll need your team ready to move the instant I make my run. Copy, Hawkeye, we'll be ready. What's your plan? That was the question, wasn't it? What was her plan? The tactical solution was obvious. Make a gun run from a safe altitude, destroy the enemy positions systematically, then allow the ground team to recover their casualty. Minimal risk to herself. Maximum adherence to doctrine. The exact approach that 2 years ago she'd have considered unacceptable. 2 years ago, she'd have done something reckless and brilliant. She'd have trusted her instincts and her aircraft and the strange alchemy that happened when a pilot and machine became something more than the sum of their parts. 2 years ago, Chris Valdez had died following her orders. Nix rolled the A-10 inverted, looking down through the canopy at the valley below. Upside down, the world looked different. Clearer, maybe, or just strange enough to make impossible things seem reasonable. She rolled upright and keyed the radio. Viper lead, I'm going to make a low-altitude strafe run directly over the casualty position. The gun run will suppress the enemy for approximately 15 seconds. That's your window. Get your man and get to cover. Silence on the radio. Then, Hawkeye, that puts you in direct small arms range. They'll light you up. I know, 2 words, flat, sir. We can't ask you to do that. You didn't ask, I'm offering. Another pause, longer this time. When the ground commander spoke again, his voice carried a different quality. Something like awe mixed with disbelief. Copy, Hawkeye 7-7, we'll be ready. And, thank you. Nix didn't respond. Thanks were premature. She hadn't done anything yet except commit to a course of action that had approximately even odds of getting her killed. The A-10 came around for its run, and for the first time in 733 days, Captain Nix Keller felt something other than numbness. It might have been fear, or purpose, or possibly the first stirring of whatever it was that made people choose to matter again. The valley waited below, full of men with guns and one American who'd stopped bleeding or was about to. The sky above was impossibly blue, and somewhere in that blue, a ghost was learning to fly again. The A-10 lined up on its attack vector, and Nix performed the pre-combat checklist with hands that had stopped shaking. Weapons armed. Master arm switch on. Guns selected. The familiar ritual, but different now because something had changed in her, some fundamental shift in the architecture of who she was and why she flew. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was loaded with 1,100 rounds of 30 ammunition. Each round weighed just under a pound. When fired, the 7 rotating barrels could put out 65 rounds per second, creating a sound like the sky tearing apart. The recoil was so powerful it actually slowed the aircraft. Flying the A-10 during a gun run was less piloting and more controlled falling with violence attached. She'd done this hundreds of times. Never quite like this. 30 seconds, she transmitted. On the ground, soldiers would be preparing, checking weapons, taking deep breaths, looking at their wounded brother and then at the sky, praying to whatever gods soldiers pray to when their lives depend on a pilot they've never met. The valley rushed toward her, 300 knots, descending through 1,000 feet. The enemy positions visible now as darker patches among the rocks, men with rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. Professionals who'd learned their trade fighting the Soviets and then the Americans. They knew what an A-10 gun run looked like. They were ready. 800 feet, 600. Small arms fire starting up, tracer rounds floating past her canopy with deceptive laziness. Each one traveling faster than sound, any one capable of ending her. The armor around the A-10's cockpit was titanium, designed to withstand up to 23 rounds, comforting in theory. In practice, modern anti-aircraft weapons could punch through it with contempt, but the A-10 wasn't designed to be invulnerable. It was designed to absorb damage and keep flying. Redundant systems. Separated engine nacelles so one hit couldn't take out both. Flight controls that could survive significant damage. The aircraft could lose an engine, half a wing, and most of its tail and still limp home. They called it the Warthog. Ugly, indestructible, beloved, 400 feet. The targeting reticle centered on the ridgeline. Her finger rested on the trigger. 1 second. 2. The moment stretched, time dilating the way it did in combat when consciousness sharpened to a point. She could see individual rocks, individual men. One of them was raising an RPG launcher, tracking her aircraft. Too late. She was already committed. Nix pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared to life with a sound like continuous thunder, the brrrrrt that infantrymen claimed they could feel in their bones from a mile away. The cannon vibrated the entire aircraft, shells ejecting from the bottom of the fuselage in a stream of brass. The targeting computer, linked to her helmet display, showed impacts marching across the ridgeline in a precise line of destruction. Rock exploded. Dirt fountained. Men who'd been shooting at her suddenly had other priorities, like survival, like finding any cover that might protect them from 30-millimeter death. The gun run lasted 4 seconds. In that time, Nix fired 260 rounds. Over 500 pounds of ammunition transformed into violence. The reticle tracked across the enemy positions with mechanical precision, but there was nothing mechanical about what she felt. This was personal, intimate. The kind of flying that required you to believe in something beyond your own survival. Below, she glimpsed movement. The American ground team surging from cover, 2 soldiers sprinting toward their wounded brother while their teammates laid down suppressive fire. 15 meters. It looked like 15 miles when people were shooting at you. The A-10 thundered over the casualty position at 250 feet, so low Nix could see the expressions on the faces of the soldiers below. Shock, awe, the particular look people get when they witness something they'll talk about for the rest of their lives. Then she was past them, climbing, the aircraft shaking as rounds impacted the fuselage. Warning lights illuminated on her panel. Hydraulic pressure dropping in the right system. Not catastrophic. Not yet. Viper lead, you have 15 seconds before they recover. Move now. Her voice was steady despite the aircraft bucking under her hands, despite the warning tones singing in her headset, despite knowing she'd just done something that would either be studied as brilliant or insane depending on how the next 60 seconds played out. We've got him. We've got him. Moving to cover now. The ground commander's voice carried pure elation. Relief. The sound of men who'd accepted death suddenly given life. Nix pulled the A-10 into a hard climbing turn, checking her 6 for threats. 2 more warning lights. Engine temperature rising. Something in the right engine had taken damage, turbine blades probably nicked by shrapnel, still producing power, still flying. She came around for another orbit higher now, assessing. The enemy positions were recovering, rifles tracking her aircraft, but the moment had passed. The American team was back in cover with their casualty. Mission accomplished, except it wasn't a mission anymore. It was something else. Something she'd forgotten the name for in those 733 days of going through motions. Hawkeye 7-7, this is Viper lead. Casualty is secure. He's alive, unconscious but alive. Medic says he'll make it to evac. The words hit harder than the small arms fire. Alive because she'd chosen to care, because she'd remembered that impossible was just another word for necessary. Copy, Viper lead. I'm going to work on these enemy positions. Keep your heads down. With pleasure, Hawkeye, with extreme pleasure. There was something in the ground commander's voice. Respect. Gratitude. The kind that came from watching someone risk everything for people they'd never meet. Nick set up for another gun run, proper altitude this time, and somewhere in the cockpit of that damaged A-10, a pilot who'd been a ghost began to feel solid again. The next 3 gun runs were textbook. High-altitude attacks, precise targeting, systematic destruction of enemy positions. Nix worked the valley like a surgeon, eliminating threats with the cold efficiency she'd maintained for 733 days. But something was different now. The numbness had cracked, and underneath it was something raw and painful and necessary. Each trigger pull was a choice. Each maneuver a commitment. She was flying again, really flying, not just operating a machine. The A-10 responded to her inputs with mechanical faithfulness despite its damage. The right engine was running hot, but still producing power. Hydraulic pressure in the degraded system had stabilized at 40%. Enough. The aircraft could take punishment that would drop any other plane from the sky. It was designed by people who understood that survival wasn't about avoiding damage, but about continuing to function after damage was inevitable. Hawkeye 7-7, all enemy positions are suppressed or destroyed. You are clear and thank you doesn't begin to cover it. The ground commander's voice carried exhaustion and relief in equal measure. Viper lead, recommend you request immediate dust-off for your casualty. I'll maintain station until the helicopter arrives. Copy. Dust-off is already en route. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Nix checked her fuel. Enough to loiter for 30, maybe 40 minutes if she was conservative with the throttle. The damaged engine was drinking fuel faster than normal, but the mathematics still worked. She could wait. She should probably head back to base, get the aircraft inspected, file the damage reports. That's what a rational pilot would do, but rationality had stopped being her primary guidance system somewhere between the first gun run and now. She stayed. The orbit above the valley became a kind of meditation. Round and round, watching the ground team consolidate their position, seeing the enemy fighters withdraw deeper into the mountains. The sun tracked across the sky, light shifting from harsh noon brightness to something softer, more forgiving. In the cockpit, Nix found herself thinking about Chris Valdez, not with the usual crushing guilt, but something different, remembering him as a person, not a failure. He'd been a good pilot. Better than good. He'd made that final gun run knowing his aircraft was damaged, knowing the risks, because that's what the mission required. She'd given the order, yes, but he'd made the choice to follow it. They'd both been doing what they believed was right. The fact that it ended in tragedy didn't negate the decision's validity. Maybe, or maybe she was just rationalizing, trying to build a framework that allowed her to live with herself. But sitting here above this valley, having just risked everything for a soldier she'd never meet, she felt something shift. Not absolution, nothing so clean, just the possibility that carrying this weight didn't mean being crushed by it. Hawkeye 7-7, we have dust-off inbound. 2 Black Hawks 3 minutes out. Copy. I have visual. The helicopters appeared as dark specks against the mountains, growing rapidly. Us 60 Black Hawks flying nap of the earth, hugging terrain to minimize exposure. Beautiful flying, precise and aggressive. The kind of flying that required trust in your aircraft and your abilities. The dust-off landed in a storm of rotor wash and desert dust. Nix watched from altitude as soldiers loaded the casualty aboard. Quick, efficient movements born from practice and necessity. 30 seconds and the helicopter was lifting off, climbing toward safety. The second Black Hawk orbited for cover, door gunners scanning for threats, professional, coordinated. The kind of operation that only looked easy because everyone involved was exceptional. Hawkeye 7-7, casualty is secure and en route to Bagram. We are consolidating and preparing to move to our extraction point. Thanks to you, everyone's going home today. Everyone's going home. 4 words that meant everything and nothing. Success measured in continued heartbeats. Families that wouldn't receive folded flags. Futures that remained possible instead of becoming past tense. Copy, Viper lead. Good hunting. Hawkeye, before you go, can I ask your call sign story? Reaper seems heavy for someone who just saved a life. The question caught her off guard. Call signs were usually given, not chosen. Hers had appeared on the squadron roster after she returned from discharge. Someone's idea of dark humor, probably. Reaper. Because she'd come back from the dead, or because she collected souls, or because whoever assigned it thought it was edgy. She'd never questioned it, just accepted it like she accepted everything else. But now, orbiting this valley where she'd chosen to matter again, the name felt different. Viper lead, the call sign's not mine to explain. But I can tell you this, every Reaper I've read about doesn't kill. They just collect what's already been decided. Today, nothing was decided. There was a long pause. Then, copy that, Hawkeye. And for what it's worth, from where I'm standing, you're more guardian angel than Reaper. Guardian angel. The phrase was sentimental, almost embarrassing, but it touched something in her she'd thought was dead. The part that remembered why she'd wanted to fly in the first place. Not for the speed or the danger or the prestige. For this. For moments when skill and courage and a willingness to risk everything converged into saving lives. Viper lead, I'm going to head home. Stay safe out there. You too, Reaper. You too. The radio went quiet. Nix turned the A-10 toward Bagram, the damaged aircraft responding to her touch with the faithfulness of something that had survived hell and kept flying. The flight back was contemplative. Warning lights still glowed on her panel, but the aircraft maintained altitude and heading with stubborn determination. Below, the Afghan landscape scrolled past, mountains and valleys and villages where people had been fighting since before her grandparents were born. Endless war in a land that seemed designed for it. But today, in one small valley, the math had worked in favor of life instead of death. She'd made that happen. Not through passive participation or mechanical execution of orders. Through choice. Through caring enough to risk the comfortable numbness she'd built around herself. The sun was descending toward the mountains when Bagram appeared ahead. The sprawling military complex, helicopter pads and hardened shelters and acres of precisely organized chaos. Home in the way military bases become home when you've deployed enough times. Temporary, functional, real enough. Bagram Tower, Hawkeye 7-7, request priority landing. I have battle damage and a degraded hydraulic system. Hawkeye 7-7, Bagram Tower. You're cleared direct for runway 20. Emergency equipment is rolling. The tower controller's voice was professionally calm, but Nix could hear the underlying tension. Battle damage meant unpredictability. It meant a landing that might go sideways despite everyone's best efforts. She descended through pattern altitude, configuring the A-10 for landing. Flaps down. Landing gear. The indicator showed 3 green lights after a moment's hesitation that made her heart skip. All 3 wheels locked. Good. The damaged hydraulic system meant her flight controls would be stiffer, less responsive. Acceptable. She'd landed in worse conditions. The runway rose to meet her, heat shimmer making it waver like a mirage. The A-10 settled onto concrete with a chirp of tires, and Nix deployed the thrust reversers. The aircraft decelerated smoothly, tracking straight down the center line. Perfect landing. The kind that made you grateful for all the hours of training, all the practice approaches, all the muscle memory that turned complex tasks into instinct. She taxied clear of the runway and shut down the engines. In the sudden silence, she could hear her own breathing, fast, shallow. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the mission was draining away, leaving behind something like exhaustion, but also something else. Satisfaction, maybe, or purpose. She wasn't sure yet. The crew chief who met her aircraft did a slow walk around, his expression darkening with each step. "Ma'am, you've got 17 impact holes that I can see from here. The right engine housing is shot to hell. How did you even make it back?" Nix climbed down from the cockpit, her legs unsteady for a moment before muscle control returned. "The A-10 doesn't quit, you know that, Chief." "No, ma'am, but pilots do. What happened out there? What happened?" That was the question, wasn't it? A troops in contact call. A casualty in the open. A choice to risk everything for someone she'd never meet. The same kind of choice she'd made 2 years ago that ended with Chris Valdez in a flag-draped coffin. Except this time everyone lived. "I did my job, Chief, that's what happened." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, ma'am, whatever you did it hard. This bird's going to need some love before she flies again." Nix touched the aircraft's fuselage. The metal was still warm from flight, scarred from combat, beautiful in its ugliness. "Take care of her, she earned it." "Always do, ma'am, always do." The walk from the flight line to the operations building felt longer than usual. Other pilots watched her pass, their expressions unreadable. In a squadron, news traveled faster than aircraft. They'd know about the mission, about the low-altitude run, about the battle damage. They'd have opinions, but Nix found she didn't care what those opinions were. For 733 days, she'd been waiting for permission to matter again. Permission from her chain of command, from her fellow pilots, from some external authority that could absolve her of Chris Valdez's death. Today, she'd realized that permission had to come from inside. She had to give it to herself. Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks was waiting in the operations center. His expression was carefully neutral, which in military terms usually meant you were either about to be praised or crucified. Sometimes both. "Captain Keller, interesting mission." "Yes, sir. The ground team is calling you a hero. Says you saved their man with a gun run that violated approximately 12 regulations." "I accomplished the mission, sir." "You accomplished the mission by flying into small arms range at an altitude that made you a target for every insurgent in the valley. Your aircraft has 17 holes in it. The right engine is destroyed. You're lucky you didn't end up a statistic." The words were harsh, but his tone carried something else. Not quite approval, maybe respect. "I made a tactical decision based on battlefield conditions, sir. The casualty required immediate action. And if you'd been shot down? If we'd lost you and the aircraft?" It was a fair question, the kind that had to be asked. Nix met his eyes. "Then I'd have made a bad decision, but I didn't. The soldier lived. I made it back. The mission was successful." Hendricks studied her for a long moment. 2 years ago you requested discharge, said you couldn't fly anymore. What changed?" "Everything. Nothing. The weight of carrying Chris Valdez's death had broken something in her, but today she'd realized that broken things could still function, could still matter, could still choose to act when action was necessary." "I learned to live with the weight, sir. Turns out it's bearable if you put it to work." Hendricks's expression shifted. Something like understanding crossed his face. "The ground commander requested you be put in for a medal. I told him we'd need to review the tactical situation first, make sure everything was by the book." "It wasn't by the book, sir. We both know that." "No, it wasn't. It was better." The A-10 sat on the maintenance pad under harsh fluorescent lights, its battle damage cataloged by technicians who moved around it with the care of surgeons around a patient. 17 holes. Right engine destroyed. Hydraulic lines severed. Control surfaces damaged. The crew chief's preliminary assessment was 3 weeks minimum before the aircraft could fly again, maybe longer depending on parts availability. Captain Nix Keller stood at the edge of the maintenance bay, watching them work. Somewhere in those 3 weeks, she'd be assigned a different aircraft. The squadron had several A-10s. They were all functionally identical, same systems, same capabilities. But this one had brought her back. This one had absorbed the damage meant for her and kept flying. Machines didn't have loyalty or courage, but they could embody both through their design. The A-10 had been built by people who understood that combat meant taking hits and surviving anyway. Behind her, footsteps approached. She didn't turn, recognizing the gate. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, one of the younger pilots in the squadron. 25 years old, 2 deployments, hungry to prove herself in an aircraft the Air Force kept trying to retire. "Ma'am, I heard what you did today. The whole squadron's talking about it." Nix kept her eyes on the damaged aircraft. "People talk. Doesn't mean much. They're saying you flew a gun run at 250 feet. That you put yourself in direct fire to save a casualty. The tactical situation required close air support. I provided it." Chen moved to stand beside her, following her gaze to the wounded. "I've been flying for 3 years. I've never had to make a call like that. I'm not sure I could." "You could. When it matters, you find out what you're capable of." "How do you know?" It was a good question, an honest question from someone young enough to still believe in absolutes. Nix finally turned to look at her. "Because 2 years ago I made a call that got my wingman killed. I thought that meant I wasn't capable of making hard decisions anymore. Today I learned I was wrong. We're all capable. It's just a question of whether we're willing to pay the price." Chen's eyes widened slightly. Everyone knew about Valdez. It wasn't a secret, just something people didn't talk about. The kind of shadow that followed a pilot without being acknowledged. "I read the AAR on that mission, ma'am. You saved 17 soldiers. The investigation cleared you completely." Investigations deal with regulations and procedures. They don't deal with the weight of sending someone to their death. The words hung in the air between them. Too honest, maybe. Too raw for the careful professional distance pilots usually maintained, but Nix was done with careful distance. Chen was quiet for a moment. Then, "The soldier you saved today," Viper lead radioed an update. "His name is Specialist Marcus Thompson, 22 years old, from Ohio. Medics say he'll make a full recovery. He'll probably be walking in a month." Marcus Thompson, 22 years old, from Ohio. Before today, he'd been a grid coordinate and a tactical problem. Now he was a person with a name and a future. That should matter. It did matter. "Thank you for telling me," Nix said quietly. "You should know something else, ma'am. When word got out about your mission, about what you did, some of the other pilots started talking. They've been calling you the Ghost. Did you know that?" "I knew. They're not calling you that anymore." Nix looked at Chen, surprised. "No, ma'am. They're calling you the Guardian because that's what you are. The Guardian." It was sentimental and probably wouldn't stick, but it touched something deep. The same thing Viper lead had touched with his Guardian Angel comment. Recognition. Not for what she'd lost or what haunted her, but for what she'd chosen to become. "Call signs aren't mine to choose," Nix said. "No, ma'am, they're given, and this one's already spreading." Chen smiled, a quick, genuine expression. "For what it's worth, I think it fits better than Reaper ever did." She walked away, leaving Nix alone with the damaged aircraft in her thoughts. The Guardian. Maybe it was presumptuous. Maybe she hadn't earned it yet. Maybe she'd never earn it enough to balance the weight of Chris Valdez. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was choosing to try. The maintenance chief appeared at her elbow. "Ma'am, we found something interesting during the inspection." "What's that, Chief?" He led her around to the right side of the aircraft, pointing to a section of fuselage near the wing root. There, embedded in the titanium armor, was a 7.62 round. It had struck directly in line with the cockpit, but the armor had stopped it. The chief extracted it carefully with pliers, held it up to the light, deformed from impact but intact. 6 inches lower and it would have missed the armor entirely. Probably would have killed you or disabled critical systems. 6 inches higher and it would have done the same, but it hit right here in the strongest part of the armor plate. Nix took the round, felt its weight in her palm. A piece of metal that had been traveling toward her at 2,800 feet per second. Fired by someone who'd been trying to kill her. Stopped by titanium and engineering and the particular geometry of that moment. "Luck," she said. The chief shook his head. "Respectfully, ma'am, I've been working on these birds for 15 years. I've seen luck. This was something else. This was the aircraft protecting its pilot. It was anthropomorphization, assigning intention to a machine." But standing there with that deformed round in her hand, Nix understood what he meant. The A-10 had been designed by people who cared about the pilots who flew it. Every redundant system, every piece of armor, every engineering decision had been made with survival in mind. The aircraft couldn't care, but its designers had cared on its behalf. "Keep the round, Chief. Put it in the maintenance log." "Will do, ma'am, and ma'am, welcome back." "Back. You've been here physically for 6 months, but today's the first day I've seen you really present. Whatever switch got flipped, I'm glad it happened." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her holding a round that had tried to kill her and failed. She pocketed it. A reminder, not of mortality, but of the margin between catastrophe and survival, of all the things that had to align for life to continue. Marcus Thompson would walk again because that round had hit 6 inches higher instead of lower. Because the A-10's designers had cared about unknown future pilots. Because Nix had chosen to care about an unknown soldier in a valley halfway around the world. The chain of causality was absurd and beautiful and utterly real. That night, lying in her bunk in the female officer's quarters, Nix pulled out her phone. She'd been avoiding it for months, letting messages pile up unread, keeping her distance from everyone and everything outside the narrow confines of mission and routine. But tonight felt different. She scrolled through old messages. Her parents asking how she was doing. Friends from flight school checking in. A message from Chris Valdez's fiancé, sent 8 months ago, saying she didn't blame Nix and hopping she was okay. That one hurt to read, still did, but the hurt was different now, acknowledgement instead of crushing guilt. She typed a response, deleted it, typed again. Finally settled on simple truth. "I'm sorry for not responding sooner. I'm doing better now. I hope you are too." Send. The message disappeared into the digital void. Maybe it would be received with anger, maybe with relief. Maybe it would go unread, but she'd sent it and that mattered. She scrolled further, found the message from her former flight instructor, the one who'd recommended her for discharge, who'd seen her falling apart and tried to help the only way he knew how. She typed, "You were right to recommend discharge. I needed to step away. But I'm flying again. Really flying. Thank you for caring enough to make the hard call." Send. More messages to her parents. "I love you. I'm okay. I'll call soon." To old friends, still alive, still fighting, "Miss you." Each message was a thread connecting her back to the world she'd withdrawn from. Small declarations that she was present again, that she existed beyond the mission and the guilt and the careful numbness. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. She opened it. "Captain Keller, this is SSG Mike Harrison, Viper lead from today. I wanted to thank you personally for saving Marcus. He's awake now and asking about the pilot who pulled off that insane gun run. If you're ever willing, we'd like to meet you. Buy you a beer, shake your hand." Nix stared at the message for a long time. Meeting the people you saved was complicated. It made abstract tactical decisions concrete, made them about faces and names and handshakes. But concrete was better than abstract. Real was better than theoretical. She typed back, "SSG Harrison, I'd be honored to meet you and your team, and Marcus, let me know when and where." The response came back almost immediately. "Outstanding. We're at Bagram for 2 more days before rotating home. Dining facility tomorrow at 1800. We'll be the ones who can't stop talking about you." A smile touched her lips. Actual expression of positive emotion. Rare enough these days to notice. 1800 works. See you then. She set the phone down and stared at the ceiling of her quarters. Concrete and steel. Temporary architecture in a permanent war. But tonight it felt less like a cell and more like a waypoint. Somewhere on this base, Marcus Thompson was recovering from wounds that should have killed him. Tomorrow she'd meet him and his team. Next week she'd fly again in a different aircraft but with the same mission. Next month, next year, who knew? But for the first time in 734 days, the future felt like something more than just time to be endured. The weight of Chris Valdez's death was still there, would always be there. But she'd learned today that weight could be balanced by other things. By choosing to matter, by risking everything for people who needed it, by flying into the fire because sometimes that's what guardians do. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, sleep came without dreams of falling parachutes. The dining facility at Bagram was organized chaos at 1800 hours. Soldiers from a dozen different units, contractors, coalition forces, everyone trying to get dinner during the narrow window between missions and mandatory briefings. The smell of institutional food mixed with dust and jet fuel, the universal scent of deployed life. Nix entered in flight suit and boots, suddenly self-conscious. She'd spent 6 months eating alone, arriving late to avoid crowds, keeping to herself. Walking into a room to meet people who wanted to thank her felt exposing. Vulnerable. Staff Sergeant Mike Harrison was easy to spot. Mid-30s, infantry-bearing, desert-tan uniform with the subdued patches of the 10th Mountain Division. He stood when he saw her, and the 5 soldiers with him did the same. One of them was on crutches, left leg heavily bandaged. Marcus Thompson. "Captain Keller," Harrison said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." His handshake was firm, the grip of someone who understood the weight of gratitude. "Thank you for inviting me." It sounded formal, stiff. She'd forgotten how to do this, how to interact with people outside the strict hierarchies of military aviation. Thompson hobbled forward on his crutches, and Nix felt her breath catch. He was young. Impossibly young, though 22 wasn't actually that young. Just young to have come so close to dying in a valley halfway around the world. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Thompson. I'm the guy who would have died if you hadn't." He trailed off, emotion thick in his voice. "If you hadn't done what you did." Nix looked at him, really looked. Saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the pain he was managing, the overwhelming aliveness of someone who'd been unconscious and bleeding 12 hours ago. "I'm glad you're okay," she said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised her. "Okay doesn't cover it, ma'am. The doc said another 10 minutes and I'd have bled out. You gave us those 10 minutes. 10 minutes. The difference between living and dying, measured in increments smaller than a coffee break." She'd given him time by flying into weapons range and making herself a target. It had seemed necessary in the moment. Looking at him now, alive and standing, it seemed like the only possible choice. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I got shot, ma'am, but alive to feel it, which is more than I expected yesterday." One of the other soldiers, a younger kid who couldn't be more than 19, spoke up. "Ma'am, we all saw the gun run. I've never seen anything like it. You came in so low we could see you in the cockpit. The tactical situation required close proximity to ensure accuracy." Harrison laughed, a short bark of sound. "Ma'am, with all due respect, what you did went way beyond tactical requirements. You put yourself in the kill zone to give us a window. That's not tactics, that's courage." Courage. The word felt too big, too clean. What she'd done had been equal parts skill, desperation, and the refusal to watch someone die when she might prevent it. "I did what needed doing," she said. "So did you, ma'am, and we want you to know it matters. Marcus isn't just a soldier. He's got a fiancée back home. Emma, they're getting married in the spring." A fiancée named Emma, planning a spring wedding. Details that transformed Marcus Thompson from a tactical problem into a complete human with a future that would happen because Nix had chosen to fly low. "Congratulations," she said to Marcus. "Thanks, ma'am. Emma doesn't know the full story yet, just that I got injured. I'm gonna call her tonight and tell her I'm okay." The conversation flowed from there, easier than Nix expected. The soldiers told stories about their deployment, about the valley where they'd been ambushed, about the sheer terror of being pinned down with a wounded brother and no way to help him. They described watching the A-10 descend toward them, impossibly low, the sound of the GAU-8 like divine intervention in mechanical form. "We thought you were going to crash," one soldier admitted. "The angle looked wrong. Too steep, too fast. Then you leveled out right over Marcus and just destroyed everything shooting at us. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Beautiful. Not a word usually associated with violence, but Nix understood. There was beauty in precision, in machines doing exactly what they were designed for, in human skill pushing right up against the edge of possible. Harrison leaned forward. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. The other pilots in your squadron, some of them talk about you like you're a legend, but some of them talk about you like you're a ghost, like you've been somewhere they haven't. Where were you before today?" The question was direct, unvarnished. The kind soldiers asked when they'd survived something together and the normal rules of propriety no longer applied. Nix considered deflecting, maintaining professional distance. But these men had trusted her with their lives. The least she could do was trust them with truth. 2 years ago, I made a call that got my wingman killed. Good pilot, good person. He died following my order. It broke something in me. I spent the last 2 years trying to figure out how to keep flying when flying meant making decisions that could end lives. The table went quiet. Understanding passed between them, the kind that only comes from shared proximity to death. "What changed?" Marcus asked quietly. Nix looked at him, 22 years old with a bandaged leg and a fiancée named Emma waiting for a phone call. "You did, all of you. I realized that carrying the weight of hard decisions doesn't mean avoiding them. It means making them anyway and learning to live with the consequences." Harrison nodded slowly. "Ma'am, I don't know the details of what happened 2 years ago, but I know this: today you saved 7 lives. My team, Marcus, that counts, that matters." "It doesn't balance," Nick said quietly. "No, ma'am, it doesn't, but it adds to the other side of the scale. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Keep adding to the right side and hope it means something." They talked for another hour. About flying, about infantry work, about the surreal experience of being deployed to a war that most Americans had stopped thinking about years ago. The soldiers wanted to know about the A-10, about what it was like to fly, about whether she'd been scared during the gun run. She told them the truth, terror and focus existing simultaneously, the way they always did in combat. As the dinner wound down, Marcus pulled out his phone. "Ma'am, would you mind if I took a picture? Emma's going to want to know who saved my life." Nix hesitated. She'd avoided photos for 2 years, dodging squadron pictures, staying out of frame. But Marcus was looking at her with such open gratitude that refusing seemed cruel. "Sure." They gathered around her, these soldiers who'd been strangers yesterday and were something else now. Brothers in arms, maybe. Or just people who'd survived something together and bore witness to each other's continuing existence. The photo was taken. Marcus checked it, smiled. "Perfect. Thank you, ma'am, for everything." They said their goodbyes, handshakes and backslaps and promises to stay in touch that would probably fade but mattered in the moment. As Nix walked back to her quarters, the Afghan night sky stretched overhead, dense with stars invisible from most American cities. She thought about Chris Valdez as she did every day. But for the first time, the thought didn't crush her. She'd never stopped missing him, would never stop wishing she'd made a different call that day. But she'd learned today that ghosts could coexist with guardians, that the weight of the dead didn't have to prevent caring for the living. Her phone buzzed with a message. Unknown number again. She opened it to find the photo from dinner. 7 soldiers and 1 pilot, all smiling, all alive. The caption read, "The Guardian and her infantry, thanks for bringing Marcus home. Viper team." She saved the photo and kept walking. Tomorrow she'd fly again. Different aircraft, same mission, same war that had been going on since before she learned to fly. But something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't just going through motions anymore. She was choosing. Choosing to matter, choosing to risk, choosing to carry the weight because some weights were worth carrying. The Guardian. Maybe the name would stick, maybe it wouldn't. But tonight, walking under stars older than human war, Captain Nix Keller finally understood what it meant. Not someone who never failed, not someone without scars, but someone who kept showing up anyway, who kept flying into fire because that's what was needed. A Guardian wasn't invulnerable. A Guardian was just someone who refused to stop protecting, even when protection cost everything. 3 weeks later, Nick stood on the flight line as maintenance crews finished the final inspection on her A-10. The damage had been repaired, new engine installed, hydraulic systems replaced. 17 patches marked where rounds had penetrated the fuselage, each one a small testament to violence survived. The crew chief walked around the aircraft one final time, then gave her a thumbs up. "She's ready to fly, ma'am, good as new, maybe better. Thanks, Chief, for taking care of her." "Always, ma'am. This bird brought you home. We owe her." Nix performed her pre-flight inspection with the thoroughness of ritual. Every panel, every control surface, every system checked and verified. The A-10 sat patient under her hands, faithful machine waiting for its pilot. In the cockpit, everything was familiar. The smell of avionics and hydraulic fluid, the feel of the ejection seat, the view through the canopy showing the Hindu Kush rising in eternal indifference to human conflict. She started the engines, felt them spool up with their characteristic whine becoming roar. All instruments green, all systems nominal. The aircraft that had absorbed 17 rounds and kept flying was ready to do it again. Bagram Tower, Hawkeye 77, ready for departure. Hawkeye 77 cleared for takeoff runway 20, wind 230 at 8 knots. The A-10 rolled onto the runway, ungainly on the ground, awkward and heavy. But as Nix pushed the throttles forward and the aircraft accelerated down the concrete, something transformed. The wheels left the ground and suddenly the Warthog was in its element. Not graceful. The A-10 would never be graceful but purposeful, powerful, right. She climbed toward the mountains, the aircraft responding to her inputs with mechanical precision. Below, Afghanistan spread out in browns and grays and the occasional green of river valleys. Beautiful and brutal and utterly indifferent to the stories playing out across its landscape. The radio crackled. Hawkeye 77, this is Bagram Command. We have a situation developing, troops in contact requesting close air support. Nix felt her hands tighten on the controls, the familiar spike of adrenaline, the weight of responsibility settling across her shoulders like an old coat, heavy but familiar. Command, Hawkeye 77, send it. And as the coordinates came through her headset, as she banked the A-10 toward another valley where Americans needed help, Captain Nix Keller felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Not happiness. War didn't allow for simple happiness. But purpose, direction, the knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The sky above was impossibly blue. The aircraft beneath her was scarred but flying. The mission ahead was dangerous and necessary and hers to complete. She was the guardian now, not because anyone had given her the title but because she'd chosen to earn it. One mission at a time, one choice at a time, one decision to matter when mattering meant risking everything. The A-10 thundered through Afghan airspace, carrying its pilot toward another valley, another fight, another chance to add weight to the right side of the scale. And for the first time since Chris Valdez died following her order, Nix Keller flew not with numbness or guilt or mechanical obligation, but with something approaching peace. Not the peace of resolution, some weights never fully lifted, but the peace of acceptance, of understanding that the price of caring was sometimes unbearable but the cost of not caring was worse. She was alive, she was flying. And somewhere ahead, soldiers were waiting for the sound of salvation wearing the form of an ugly jet built around a gun. She would reach them, she would help them. And tomorrow, if she survived, she would choose to do it again, because that's what guardians did. They showed up. They risked everything. They carried impossible weights and made hard choices and learned to live with the consequences. The mountains rose ahead, ancient and indifferent. The radio filled with urgent voices. The war continued as it always had, as it probably always would. But in the cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt, a pilot who'd been a ghost found her way back to being human. And that, in the end, was victory enough.